Hi, Benny. Nice to see you again.
So welcome everybody to our latest QTVI session. Hope everybody had midterm or a nice half term. I know it was half term in the UK last week. It wasn't here in Ireland, but I hope all you guys had a nice break and back to hear more about Braille displays. And Angus is here with me, my colleague Angus from Sight and Sound in the UK. My name is Stuart Lawler, and I look after Sight and Sound Ireland, but I'm also specialist lead across our Braille products. And today we're taking a look at Braille displays and how Braille is implemented, I suppose, in different platforms. Angus, do you want to say anything by way of introduction?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Great to see so many of you here again. It's a pleasure to have you. As Stuart sort of said there, he'll be running through the session, and if you've got, I'm just here to facilitate and track questions, etc. So if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them into the chat. If you do put them into the main Zoom chat, please make sure that you select all panelists and attendees from the drop-down box, just to make sure that everyone can see the question. Or you can use, I say you can use the Q&A section, but I can't actually see it.
No, we've disabled, you can raise your hand. So we thought it was, sorry, and that was more me. I found it very difficult to monitor both. So we just have chat and raise hand. And if you want to talk, you can raise your hand.
Okay, great. So yeah, raise your hand if you'd like to say something and we can unmute you. Otherwise, yeah, just get your questions in the chat and Stuart will answer them when we pause. I think that's everything. Stuart, back to you, sir.
Thank you, Angus. So so my name is Stuart, as I said, and I've been using assistive technology and JAWS and Braille technology for quite a while. Don't know, I lose track sometimes. Sometimes it's scary to think of how long. So I won't try to go back that far. And really today, I suppose I want to talk a bit about Braille displays first and some of the characteristics, some of the common characteristics found on Braille technology and what you might like to look for. And then talk about how Braille is implemented on different platforms and show you a couple of things. Now, I don't usually use video, so, but I am today because I'm going to show you some of these actual hardware that's on my table. So apologies for the sort of shaved head, because everybody needs a haircut at this time post-lockdown or coming out of lockdown. But I have a lot of Braille displays on my kitchen table here, and I'm going to go through them one by one and talk a little bit about them and the scenarios that they may be used in. And those of you who were with us at the very first session that we did, I think way back in, I don't know, April, I think, we looked at the Braille Sense Polaris. And that, of course, is a note taker. And one of the questions I will try to touch on today is note taker or Braille terminal in a school, which is better, which works well. And it's an interesting question to ponder on, and there are a number of things you might need to take into account. So that's what we're going to try and do today over the next hour or so. Hopefully get to do a couple of practical things as well with this technology, and hope that you'll be able to actually see some stuff. I'll do some screen sharing with my computer and my phone as well, but do please shout if you can't see something, or if there's something you're not understanding. As Angus said, put it in the chat or put your hand up, and we really love to get your feedback on this session. So the first Braille display here is, Angus, I hope you can see this okay.
Yep, a bit to your right, a little bit to your right. That's it,
okay.
Perfect. And a little bit back, a little bit back towards you.
Okay.
And a little bit up.
A little bit up, okay, fantastic.
Perfect.
So, you see, we get there eventually. So this is the Focus 40 Braille terminal made by Freedom Scientific, or Vispero as they are now. So this is a device, and this is actually one that we're going to use in a few minutes. This will work very nicely with JAWS, but it'll also work very nicely on the iPhone. And we'll show you how that works as well. Just a couple of things I want to point out in relation to this Braille display, and these are kind of common characteristics. Most Braille displays have a Braille keyboard, so you're sort of 6 Braille dots, spacebar, there's a menu key here in the middle, and then if you can see where my finger is, there's a load of tiny little keys That
Just need to go up a bit, please, Stuart. Just
yeah.
there we go.
So
Perfect.
there's one just over each Braille cell, and these are called cursor routing keys. And I think we probably touched on this when we were talking about the Braille Sense Polaris. When you press one of these keys, when you're reading Braille, it jumps the cursor to the point where your finger is. Very useful altogether. So that's the Focus 40. We will come back to that in a minute. Now, the next one, as I pull out of my magic box, this is actually its case. I should maybe take this out of its case, but this is just a smaller version of the Focus 40. This is the Focus 14. And this is a device that does the very same keyboard, same cursor routing keys, but you might use this more with a phone, for example, on a mobile platform where you want to carry it around with you. Not ideal if you need to read lots of text, because obviously 14 cells of Braille at any one time is not a lot for your reading. So that's the Focus 14. And the last one I just want to show, and we're not going to actually use all these, but I do want to show them. This is a device, Angus, I hope you can see it.
We can, perfect.
So this is called Q-Braille, and this is from HIMS, the same people who make the Polaris. Now, the interesting thing about this one is that HIMS have built a device that has a Braille keyboard, but everything else has a QWERTY layout. So in other words, you have the Windows key, you have Control, Shift, and Alt keys, you have cursor keys, you have home, end, you have function keys. And they designed this for people who, and apparently this is prominent in the States. I personally have not had this issue, but this is what the feedback they were getting. There was lots of people who were using Braille in their work and were saying, I have a Braille terminal, I use it to read, but every time I need to perform a Windows command, I'm pushing it out of the way and I'm going back to my keyboard, and I'm spending half my time pulling the keyboard over and back on the table. And they said it would be good if a Braille display would have the QWERTY controls already built in. So the idea here would be, if you want to copy text, the shortcut in Windows, which would be Control and C, in this instance, you would hold down the Control key and you would press C in Braille. Now, the challenge with a device like this is that it helps to have maybe 3 hands for some of the key combinations. So Q-Braille is another device that's a Braille display. It's a kind of a hybrid device. It's a Braille display and a note taker all in one. And I suppose the note taker options are the functionality of the note taking is probably quite limited, but that's what it does. And it really is designed for people who don't want to have to learn a whole lot of additional commands to use Braille with a computer, but who just want to use the traditional computer keys. So we're going to go back to the Focus in a sec, but I suppose what I will say about Braille displays in terms of things you might like to look at, things like the cursor routing keys, which should be found on just about any Braille terminal these days, the length of the Braille display, how many characters is there? Are there 14 for the very mobile ones? There's a device, for example, that has 12. The RNIB have the Orbit Reader 20, which has 20 characters, of course. We saw the Focus 40, and then there is, would you believe, an 80 version. So that's twice as long as the Focus 40, but with 80 cells of Braille. Not probably very common, and not maybe the most portable thing to carry around with you. The other thing you want to look at is connectivity. How do these things connect? So traditionally, they used to connect over USB, or in the olden days, parallel and serial, if anyone's old enough to remember parallel and serial connections on computers. Now they connect over USB and Bluetooth. Bluetooth's the key, especially for mobile phones and tablets. And so then the question to ask is, how many connections can you have active at once? So the Focus Braille terminals will allow you to have 5 Bluetooth connections and 1 USB connection active simultaneously. That means, and we'll show this in a few minutes, that I can move between my Braille display and I can control my phone and my computer with just one press of a key. I can switch between controlling them both. Okay, so they're the things you probably need to look for. And then outside of that, you start looking at what are the features. And the features that you will get on a Braille display will in general go on what screen reader you're going to use. So whether you're going to use JAWS, or whether you're going to use something on the mobile platforms, for example, and we look at that in a few minutes. What features do those screen readers offer you, and how do they interact with a Braille terminal? So they're just some of the things you might want to think about. And then, of course, how are you fitting this into your curriculum? So does a Braille display work with an iPad maybe in the classroom? Well, it does, but then is the application that everybody else in the class is using on the iPad going to be accessible? And whilst it's accessible to speech, is it accessible to Braille to the same level? And the other thing I will say is that using a Braille terminal on a mobile platform is slightly different to using Windows or using a note taker, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a while. So that's the background. I'm now going to do a little bit of work showing you the focus with JAWS and how I can connect this using USB to my Microsoft Surface here. Unless, Angus, I guess just before we start, unless there's any comments or anybody wants any clarification at this moment.
There's nothing in the chat at the moment that needs answering, but brilliant. I will let you know.
Okie doke. Right. Now, the Focus Braille display, I did say to you, has Bluetooth and USB. I could connect it to my computer using Bluetooth, but it would take too long. And I'm not entirely sure I'd be confident doing it live because Bluetooth connections don't always work. So I'm going to go old school and connect a cable that we just know it's going to actually work. This is a USB-C cable, so it's a very standard USB cable. You get them anywhere. And we plug it here into the left-hand side of the Braille display. It just clicks in there. And the other end is going to go into my USB port on my computer. Now, I'm very limited on my desk space here, so I'm probably just going to have to put the Braille display here, and you probably won't see it, Angus, but I can talk through what I'm doing. Before I do that, let me share my screen so that you guys will be able to see what's happening. So I'm just going to share my screen, and I'm going to share my computer sound so you'll get to hear JAWS as well. Hopefully you're hearing JAWS as well, Angus.
We are, that's great, thanks.
Brilliant. Okay.
JAWS Professional.
So I'm in JAWS. Let me just stick this USB in, and what should happen, because this is a Braille display from Vispero, who make JAWS. So what should happen is this will just pick it up immediately. I won't even have to restart JAWS. I'll just have to, I'll get Braille. There we go. And hey, on my Braille display, it says JAWS version 2020. So I'm now, USB just stopped working there for a sec. Okay, so now I can control my computer, my Braille display, using JAWS. I think my USB cable's a bit funny. Let me just reconnect this. Perhaps not move it around as much. Okay. Now, I can control my computer using the Braille display.
Folder view list view Outlook.
So for example, if I go into Microsoft Word here.
Cortana. Meeting control. Search box edit computer Braille. Word app. Press right to switch preview.
Microsoft Word.
Opening Word.
And I'm now going to, once I get Word open and I get a blank document, I'll be able to type.
Document one word.
And I have a little flashing cursor. I know it's very difficult to see this, but I have a little flashing cursor under my finger to show me that I'm ready to type.
Misspelled. Hello, this is a test for Microsoft.
So I'm typing in grade 2 Unified English Braille. I know I made a spelling error there because JAWS informed me with a sound. But the point is, I'm now using my computer. I'm using the Braille keyboard on my computer to write Braille, and I'm able to read it back in Braille, and instantaneously that's being translated into print. Now there are
file name, save as menu, choose a leaving menus, more save options, save button, Alt+S, don't save button.
There are loads of controls on the front of the Focus display, and these are what we call panning controls and navigation controls. And the two buttons were at the very left and very right of the the ends, I suppose, of the Braille terminal are the panning keys. So they will pan the Braille forwards and backwards. And you can also set this up to automatically pan. So if you have a Braille reader who's quite fast and you don't want to have to keep pressing a button to move on to the next line of Braille, you can have the focus display automatically pan for you. Now I think my USB cable here keeps, every time I move the display, it doesn't like it. So there we go. Let me just reconnect that for a sec. And I just want to show you some of the Braille settings that are in JAWS, so you can see how configurable some of this stuff is. Okay. My USB port is not happy. There we go. Okay. Right. I'm not going to worry about the USB for a sec. I'm going to just go through some of the Braille settings that are in JAWS so you can see how they operate. Now, the easiest way to set up your Braille settings is actually from something called the JAWS Startup Wizard.
Desktop 1.
And
Meeting controls.
when we did
JAWS
the JAWS session,
JAWS Zoom. Meeting JAWS Professional.
here about, I don't know, a long time ago anyway, we did look at the Startup Wizard. So I'm going to go back in there again for a sec, just to show you where you find this stuff.
Slower.
Slow the speech a bit so everybody can hear it. The Startup Wizard in JAWS is located in the Help menu. So if I go to the Help menu.
Help menu, Command, Search, License, Startup Wizard, Z.
And enter on the Startup Wizard.
Leaving menus, JAWS Startup Wizard dialog. Help us improve.
Now, there's loads of screens in the Startup Wizard. I'm not going to go through all of these. We went through a lot of them before, but I want to go skip a few screens ahead.
Speech, run, JAWS, common, verbose, Braille translation settings, language combo box, English United Kingdom, 14.
These are the things that you might want to set up in Braille settings, okay? The first thing is your language. And we have ours set to English UK as the base language.
Output combo box, Unified English Braille Grade 2, 5 of 5.
So I've
Alt
selected
+O.
Unified English Braille Grade 2.
Input combo box, Unified English Braille Grade 2, 2 of
and my
2.
Input. Now this is significant because you can set these separately if you choose. So maybe, you know, people learn Braille in different ways, and maybe some people like to learn, maybe they're struggling reading contractions, but they're able to write them pretty well. So they're happy to write their contractions, but they want to see that in grade 1 or uncontracted Braille. Or a classic example, of course, as we all know, and I can speak personally to this, is the challenges those of us who learned Braille before we learned to type had with literacy. So the one I always tell people about is the word as, A-S. But of course, those of you who are here today know that as in Braille is a Z. And I always thought when I started to learn to type at age 9 that as was spelled A-Z. And why wouldn't you? If you think of it, it's one of the daft rules actually of Braille. There are not many, but that's one. So if I had had a Braille function like this, I could have typed as with a Z in my contracted input, but I would have seen on my Braille display AS written out in uncontracted Braille. So that's why that's a really useful feature and one that I flag. The other one, by the way, that's useful is another feature in JAWS called Braille Study Mode. And Braille Study Mode is designed for people who are learning Braille. And what it does is those cursor router keys that we talked about earlier, when you press a cursor router key, it will speak the letter that the cursor router key is sitting on, that your cursor is sitting on. So if you're maybe giving people Braille exercises and you're getting them to read letters across on the Braille terminal, and you say to them, press the cursor router key above the letter F. When they get to F and press the cursor router key, JAWS will respond by verifying for them that that's a letter F. So I think they're just really interesting things to point out.
Back button, next button.
Let's just go to the next screen here for a sec.
Braille settings, Braille mode combo box, structured, 2 of 3,
Okay.
Alt +
There
L.
are different Braille modes, and the one that we use almost exclusively here is structured, which essentially follows the patterns of speech of the screen reader.
Enable flash messages checkbox checked, Alt + E.
Flash messages are notifications, are things that flash up on the screen, which you can turn off. if you don't want them to come up in Braille and interrupt your flow when you're reading, but they are turned on by default.
Reverse panning buttons, checkbox not checked.
You can reverse panning buttons. This essentially means that the button that pans the Braille forward will pan the Braille back.
Enable word wrap, checkbox checked. Alt plus W.
And enable word wrap, of course, means that words will, the Braille display will only fit on the line a word that it is able to fit. It's not going to try to break up words.
Back button, finish button.
Okay. There are other settings in the Braille display settings. The one that some people still look at, but I think from an education perspective, this is not such a concern, is there is a setting to suppress capital signs. We were working with somebody about 6 or 7 months ago who had read Braille all his life and was using a Braille display for certainly, I think, the first or second time in his career. But he was a broadcaster. And he actually said, which was really interesting, that having the capital signs in front of a letter slowed down his Braille reading, and he wanted them suppressed. So they can be turned off if you want. In terms of using JAWS with a Braille display, on the L-Braille session that we're going to do next, we'll talk a lot more about that. There are a whole load of keystrokes and key combinations that you can use to enable JAWS to work and to input, to control Windows and control the computer from just the Braille display. So I could, if I wanted, I'm using a Microsoft keyboard, I could take this keyboard off the surface altogether and use my focus to completely control the computer. That is possible. There is a steep learning curve, and in terms of when this should be introduced to kids, I sort of say age 12 and upwards, because there's quite a lot to learn. And this probably brings me to the points about note taker versus what you're seeing at the moment, which is a screen reader and a Braille terminal. Where do you use one and not use the other? I suppose the richness of the curriculum these days and the importance in particular of using online tools and being able to search on the internet is crucial in education. And I do believe nothing does that better than a PC solution with a mainstream browser and a screen reader like JAWS. I think the Polaris is good for starter offers, but for internet browsing, you're not going to get mileage from it. So for that type of thing, if that's important to people and Braille is their primary means, then definitely a display like this would be useful. And also for people in the latter ends of school who are looking at going on to third level or further ed, with a Braille display and a computer combination, it's going to be a very powerful piece of kit. The note taker, definitely for introduction to Braille post using something like a Perkins, and for having that walled garden type experience, I suppose I'd call it, where teachers and special needs assistants and everybody else can really get their heads around what's going on without learning a whole load of commands. Note takers are great. And of course, note takers also are a little more portable and have that instant on, instant ready functionality. So it's something worth thinking about and conversations worth having when you're trying to choose Braille solutions in a person's journey through school. Right, Angus, this is an appropriate point to take a moment if there are queries in relation to Braille and Windows and JAWS and those kind of things.
Sure. Okay, so I've got one question for you from Shane.
Yeah.
Thanks for your question, Shane. So the question is actually about note takers and in Braille terminal mode. So he's asked, can you use a note taker in Braille terminal mode to connect and operate a PC in the same way you use the Focus? He's especially thinking about the Braille Note Touch.
Okay, I'm going to give the real Irish answer here that'll drive Shane mad. The answer is yes and no, but I'll try and do better than that. Okay, yes, you can for Braille input. For Braille output with JAWS, and I am very specifically talking about JAWS at the moment, because Vispero make the Focus and Vispero have obviously make JAWS. They've built very specific command sets in so that you can totally control the computer using the Braille display. You cannot do to that level with Polaris and you cannot do it to that level with the Braille Note Touch. But what you can do with all those machines is you can get Braille output, and you will be able to type in things like Microsoft Word. How well it will do it, how well the translation will work, will depend on, in terms of the Braille Note Touch, will depend on what Humanware have made available and have exposed, I suppose, to JAWS to allow it to work. And I do think Humanware, in fact, I just saw it recently, they did update some of their Braille drivers, so you should be able to, at least, you'll definitely be able to get it working as a Braille output device, and input, I think mileage will vary a little bit.
Okay, great. Thanks, Stuart.
Okay, so I'm going to
Zoom.
Sorry,
Start
I'm going
button
to
unavailable.
unshare.
Meeting
That's
control.
correct English. My screen, and I'm going to just, if you all give me a second, I'm going to now share out my iPhone screen, and then I want to talk a little bit about the history of Braille, because the iPhone, I think, is interesting for a whole load of reasons in terms of how accessibility has been built into this.
Would you like one more question, Stuart? I've just had another question.
Oh, why not? Why not?
Why not? Thanks for your
If
question,
it's a
Tracy.
nice one, Angus.
Oh well, I wouldn't know, to be honest. I'm sure it is coming from Tracy here. So we've got how do you see the progression and teaching of Perkins, Braille Note, and Braille Display? Will they need early introduction of laptop alongside Perkins for touch typing? That's a lot going on.
That's a great question, though, and I don't know that I have the answer. I mean, I wish. Look, so I was in. I left secondary school in 1993. So when I was leaving school, I think there was one Braille display which didn't have a keyboard, so it was for output only. I know. Oh, and I can only speak really from my experience of the school system here in Ireland and the people we support. The kids who we're supporting, who are using things like Polaris, for example, are all almost exclusively doing touch typing classes alongside that. So they have touch typing hours, I suppose, where they're learning to type. And they're also doing, they're also using the Polaris. And then I've seen in secondary school, sort of age 13 onwards, somebody is introducing a Braille display as well with JAWS. I think the challenge for students with impaired vision, the challenge is always that there's so much to learn, and it's so easy for us now to get all our content from our mobile phones. And I was supporting somebody last year who was finishing secondary school, will go on to third level this year, and she almost exclusively uses her mobile phone and her Braille display. And I was trying to explain to her that when she really needs to do some serious research work, that's probably not going to be the most straightforward way for her to work. So I think keyboarding skills need to be introduced very early on, alongside the note taker, and kids almost have to be taught to compartmentalize things. But actually, I think for them that's easy. I think it's the people around them who are supporting them find that a little more tricky. I don't know if that helps to answer any of that. It's a big question, and I think it really depends on the resources that are available and the people who are involved in that education supports as well.
I think that's great, Stuart. So sort of in summary to the question, do you think it's too much going on, or do you think it's, as long as if they've got the right support, it should be fine?
I think kids are very resilient, and they love this stuff. You put stuff in front of kids and they'll take it, and in fact sometimes that's the challenge, because they end up doing stuff that the people who are there to support them kind of go, what's going on here? What are they doing? So I think the kids won't have any problem. It's just managing how that is rolled out and how everybody else is comfortable enough so that everybody can keep pace with it.
Great. That's really helpful. Thanks, Stuart. I've got one more question actually. It's just come
Sure.
in then from Manisha. Thanks for the question, Manisha. She's asked, what do you recommend, a Braille Note Touch or a Braille Display if someone wants to go for further education?
I'm really gonna say Braille Display. The people who, going back to that girl I was talking about a moment ago who had used a Braille actually, and she was coming from a Braille note taker with her phone and got through secondary school with it. but really struggled to use JAWS with any degree of confidence on the internet. I think you remember when you're leaving school and going to college, you're kind of doing this precursor to the world of work, where a Braille note taker is not going to cut it. In many environments, they might let you use it to take notes in a meeting, but they won't let you put anything sensitive on it. They probably won't let it onto their networks. People look at you strangely, you know, if you even have a Braille display. So I think we've got to move people towards that mainstream aspect, certainly if they're going to college. And there's a lot of platforms in college like Moodle and Blackboard and Collaborate and a few other things that we've been supporting people with that just don't really, they're not optimized to work on Braille Note type technology, whether it's Braille Note or Polaris or anything else. They're optimized to work on a PC.
So Braille Display would be the
Braille Display, yeah, Braille Display and screen reading, and that really fits into, you know, links well to people learning how to use screen reading, learning how to touch type, whilst at the same time obviously having their Braille skills. And then when people know how to do that, if they choose that their preferred format is Braille, that is absolutely fine. They can use their Braille Display, they can type on the Braille Display, they can input in grade 2 if they wish, and they can have output in print.
Manisha says, okay, I see the point. Thank you. Thanks for the question, Manisha. That was great.
Thank you, Manisha. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's it for questions for now.
All right, brilliant. So I'm going to share the screen of my iPhone. Before I do that, I just want to talk about Apple's philosophy and Apple's approach and give you a little potted history of why this is great, but why it was also a little challenging. Okay, so Apple, as you know, released the iPhone 3 or the iPhone 2, I think it was the original one, or the one, in 2007, flat piece of glass. The next year they brought the next one out, a flat piece of glass. And a lot of us who were blind at the time, you know, and a lot of the people who work with blind people and organizations were very concerned that, hey, we're all going touchscreen. This is the way the world is going, and nobody is looking at making these things accessible. And then in 2009, Apple announced that their iPhone was going to be accessible with VoiceOver, their screen reader. And me and a whole lot of other people said, I'm not going to bother with that thing. I'll never use that. How would you ever use a flat piece of glass? And I remember seeing an iPhone the first day somebody had one, and we switched on VoiceOver, and I remember thinking, this is terrible, this is dreadful, not touching this yoke. And then 6 or 9 months later, I was reading a lot and listening to podcasts and hearing that people in the blind community internationally, I suppose, were kind of going, no, this actually works. This thing can facilitate me mainstream access to a whole load of things. So I got one then. And then a year or a year and a half later, Apple introduced Bluetooth keyboard support. And that was huge because suddenly we're all struggling to type on touchscreens, and I'm still useless. I find it really difficult to type a message on a touchscreen. And it's really interesting because I had this conversation with a developer about 6 or 7 years ago who was sighted. He's fully sighted. And I said to him, one of the big challenges for blind people is typing fast on the touchscreen, or at least for most blind people. And he said, it's not blind people. He said, I'm fully sighted and I find it difficult. So Apple brought in a Bluetooth keyboard support, and then they relatively quietly announced Braille support, Braille display support. So suddenly you could connect your Braille display to your iPhone, and the entire phone was accessible over your Braille display. And this is really, really interesting. And in the beginning, it was very ropey. And it was so ropey that we did not recommend it for schools. And indeed, if it was still this ropey, I probably wouldn't be showing it to you today. So just to give you an example, and I'm sorry to those of you, there may be some of you who've seen this stuff before and who understand some of the ropiness. But I do want to explain what Apple have done, because it's a journey in their understanding of the needs of blind people, I think. You will understand, I think, those of you, lots of mention today of the Braille Note and of, you know, Braille Displays. So I take it that there's an understanding already that you guys know that Braille displays generally, Braille technology generally works that you type a word, you press the space bar, the word is translated, it appears on screen. Okay, and that's how we have all learned for these things to work. Apple did it differently. Apple decided, as you type, we'll translate on the fly. Now, the example we always use for this is the word blend. So if I was writing in the early days of Apple Braille support, if I was writing blend and I write BL and I pause for a moment, or someone calls me and I get momentarily off track and I take 2 or 3 seconds, by the time I go back to the word to finish, put in END, it's written blind. So it would end up writing blind end. And we all got some very interesting translation words from those things. And there was all sorts of hacks to try to fix it. And, you know, oh, if you turn off translation when you're writing a word, or if you press a particular key, it'll fix it. And, you know, I remember talking to lots of people and saying, we can't say this to kids. It gives really bad Braille habits as well. It's just really not appropriate. So this was the situation in Apple for 2 or 3 years, I think, with Braille. Those of us who were hacks and who didn't mind jumping around hoops used Braille with a lot of success, I have to say. And then 2015, 2016, they did a huge amount of work on Braille. And indeed, last year, Apple implemented LibLouis tables. So the LibLouis Braille translation, which is a free and open source Braille library, has a huge amount of languages in it, loads and loads of languages. They're now all built into Apple products. And so that was really important. And now Braille is something that we can confidently introduce to kids and say, this will really work on your iPad. If you have an iPad in the classroom and you want to write something, you want to use the Mail app, or you want to use Safari to do something, you can do that. And by the way, I'm very conscious, somebody might say, what about Android? Where are we with Android and Braille? We're somewhere. We're nowhere as connected as we are with where we are now with the phone. So Apple have obviously built all this in. Android have a Braille translator, but you have to install it. And the key maps for it are quite different, and are quite different to any other key maps that you might have seen before. So Android Braille is a bit of a work in progress. Their translations are a bit of a work in progress, but Apple do it really well. And I just want to show you briefly, I want to pair my Focus 40 here, just to remind everyone, we'll bring it up again, Focus 40 Braille display with my iPhone. And we'll, just to show it works, we'll send Angus a WhatsApp message to see how he's doing over there in Kent, and see how it works. So I'm going to share my iPhone screen so that hopefully you guys can all see it. And Angus, I'm hoping you're seeing my screen.
Yeah, we've got the screen okay. Broadcast screen up.
And I'm hoping now you're seeing the home screen of my phone.
Yes, perfect.
Brilliant. Okay. So this is worth, again, for people who don't know about this, you can do this on any iPhone. If you have an iPhone today and you have a Braille display lying around the house, you can do this on any iPhone, okay? So let's go into the settings of my phone. Or indeed, I could do this with Siri as well. I could tell it to open the accessibility. So I'm going to swipe down here. By the way, I have my, I'm hearing speech in my ear. This does not allow us to share the sound of the speech, but I'll talk through it. So I'm going to go to accessibility. I'm going to go to voiceover, and then I'm going to tap on Braille. And I just want to flag a couple of the Braille settings here that are not all of them, but just some of them that are here. So Braille display settings, your output is set to contracted and input is contracted. Just like JAWS, you can set these separately. So if you have someone who's learning Braille, likes to type in contracted, as I would have liked to do as a kid, but needs to know how to spell as, you can set this up so that it works for people, okay? Then there's something called Braille screen input, which I'm not going to show today, but essentially what this lets you do is use the touch screen of your iPhone as a Braille keyboard. So you can put your fingers on the screen of the phone and type in Braille as though you were using a Braille keyboard. It's a really interesting feature. And then you can go in here to choose your Braille tables. And this is where you choose LibLouis, for example, or if you have multiple languages that you want to set up, you can set these up here. Right, I'm going to flick down here and I'm going to go to choose a Braille display. So by default, when you turn on VoiceOver and open the Braille settings, assuming your Braille display is turned on, which mine is, it keeps looking for a Braille display till it finds something. Now, mine, you might see there's one highlighted called Focus 14. That's my own Focus 14, which I use every day, which is currently paired to my iPhone. So we're going to pair a new Braille display. And I see a Focus 40 here, and it says not connected or not paired. So I'm going to double tap this and connect it. And it says it's pairing. And now it's asking me for a PIN code. And the PIN code is, sorry, I've just kicked myself out of the settings. Sorry, just do this again really quickly. Okay, so the PIN code is 4 zeros. So I'm going to just do this again. So what happened was there, I didn't enter the PIN code quickly enough, and now it's kicked me out of the Braille terminal. So I have to now switch off the Braille display, turn it on again, and connect. And I'm just going to pick up the phone so I enter the code a bit quicker this time. So here's my Focus 40. And so the pin is 4 zeros. And okay, it didn't pair. I don't know why it didn't pair. I'll try this again. These things always work best live. Right, 0, 0, 0, pair. There we go. Okay, right, now it's paired. I'm going to put the phone down. My hands are free, and I've got the Braille display here, and I'm going to start using the phone with the Braille display. So now I'm going to go to the home screen, and I'm going to go to, for example, WhatsApp. And I'm going to create a new message. And my Focus has just decided it doesn't want to do this. So just one sec. So what should happen, of course, is that I can create a new message and type on the keyboard of the Focus display. And that will allow me to write in contracted Braille. For some reason, this has not worked, but I can guarantee you it does work normally. This Focus display clearly has funny things going on because it didn't like the USB either. Just let me really quickly go back into settings here and see, can we make sure this is still paired? Go back to Braille and go in here to Focus.
It's still showing us paired at the moment, yeah.
Yeah. I'll just, sometimes if I, oh, there we go.
Aha, now it's disconnected.
I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, let me try this really quickly before it stops again. So we go into WhatsApp.
The screen sharing's now stopped for some reason.
That's because I got a missed call. Okay.
Someone's just called you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, at least you know this is live. This is all live. Okay, let me start the screen share again. Apologies for that. Okay, you should have your screen again, Angus. I hope.
Yeah, we got it again. We got your beautiful little bubba there. So
let me go into create a new message, and I'm going to create. So it's asking me who I want to search for. For example, I'm going to type Angus in Braille, and here is Angus's contact. And I'm moving through, I'm using my Braille display to move through I have some messages to Angus already. So I'm moving through the thread, and I'm going to say, hello, Angus. How are things today? And I'm going to send that. And it sends. And the really interesting thing about this, actually, I did this with a colleague before. We were trying to see, was writing on a Braille terminal in an iPhone faster than writing on the touchscreen, and we reckoned it was way faster. So you can really work fast with this solution. There's a couple of caveats, I think, to using this. iOS with Braille has a few very funny commands. For example, using space with dots 3 and 6 if you want to press enter, or if you want to OK something rather than pressing enter, which might be what you would commonly think of. And there's also some very funny things that you have to, there are some maybe commands that would be alien to Braille users that you have to learn. For example, pressing space with dots 1, 2, and 3 does not bring you to the top of a document as it would in almost every other Braille system. You have to press space with dots 3 and 6. So that's why I think when you do introduce those to kids, it can sometimes be a little bit overload. So you have to introduce Braille on iOS almost separately to everything else. But it's a really, really great feature. And I suppose the reason I really wanted to show it was to show you what Apple are doing to really level the playing field in terms of Braille accessibility on a mainstream platform. So I am going to stop this screen share because I don't want to jinx my Braille display anymore. Angus, I'm happy to take any questions about iOS
great.
Braille or Braille in general.
Yeah, I've got a few questions.
Yep.
Some about that, and some the first one actually is actually just about another Braille display. It's from Manisha, and thanks for your question, Manisha. She would like to know the Orbit 20.
Yes.
Is it any good?
Okay, here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say a few things about the Orbit. Reminds me of the Orbit in my head. I tend to put the Orbit and Ryanair, right? Orbit is like the low fares airline model. Why is it? Why? Because it forces everybody else to bring their prices down. That has to be a great thing. And there's people using Braille displays now who never had them before. I talked to somebody last year in Mumbai who was using an Orbit, and they'd never seen this stuff before. There's people even in the UK and here in Ireland, more so in the UK, I think, because RNIB are doing some kind of deal at the moment, who've never had a Braille in their hands before and have it. But a friend of mine, I was talking to someone about this recently, and I'm kind of glad this question has come up because I think the Orbit project and the Orbit Braille display and the philosophy behind what Orbit is about, which is Braille for everybody, and part of that whole Transforming Braille group project, is super. It's particularly super if you've never had a Braille display before. It's a cheap Braille display with by the way, very good quality Braille. But if you've used anything else before, it's very hard work because you don't have cursor routing and you have a very slow refresh rate. And it makes this little, if anyone has seen this already, it makes this little click sound, click, 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 which would drive you mad in a meeting or in a classroom, I would think, because you do hear it and it actually sounds quite loud. But for me, that's not the big thing. For me, the lack of cursor routing keys is just so difficult. And I think if anybody has come from using a display that has that functionality, it's a real throwback. Now, to be fair, Orbit have said their next version they bring out will have cursor routing keys, and they're going to have different models in terms of different purchase plans, and you'll be able to pay a bit more if you want cursor routing. So is it good? Yes, it is. It's forced the price down, and it's made Braille available to lots of people who mightn't have had it for a long time. Is it going to be challenging, or is it going to be a bit frustrating for people who've used other Braille technology? Absolutely, yes.
Excellent, Stuart. Thank you for that. Hopefully that answers your question, Manisha. I've got a couple more questions for you. I've got one from Julie here. Hi, Julie. Thank you for your question. Julie would like to know, any thoughts about using Narrator with a Braille display? Are we anywhere near to it working as well as JAWS?
So, great question. The short answer is I have not tested it thoroughly enough, and it's a really interesting question actually, because of course the latest version of Windows, the April 2020 update, was just released 2 weeks ago. It got pushed onto my my home machine here the other day, and I believe there's all sorts of enhancements to Narrator, and Braille gets a mention. So I don't think we're at the point where we are with JAWS in terms of Braille input and controlling the device, but the I think the functionality is getting there quite fast, and I think it's going to be one to watch, definitely.
Excellent, thanks, Stuart.
Oh, sorry, Angus. I just should say one other thing. Sorry, I have been told, or I have read on some email lists, that it is not recommended to use Narrator with a Braille display on the same system as you use with JAWS. Apparently, there is some driver conflicts. So if you have if JAWS has its Braille drivers installed, and then you install Narrator's Braille support, you could mess up your JAWS install. So if you're going to do this, try it on a different machine.
Excellent. That's really good. Thanks, Stuart. So I've got another one from Shane. Thanks for your question, Shane. They would like to know, are there Braille shortcuts for navigating quickly on the iPhone, i.e. space and G?
Yes, there's a whole load of them. So for example, space and H goes to the home screen. Space and S will read the status indicators at the top of the screen, like your battery level and all that sort of stuff. Space and B will always bring you back to the previous screen. It's a bit like doing the fast scrub with the two fingers. Yeah, there's loads of them, Shane. And I think AppleVis, applevis.com, is a community-driven site for Apple accessibility for visually impaired people. And Apple's own Apple accessibility website has all their Braille shortcuts published, and they are very good about updating them as each new version comes out. And also, any Braille display manufacturer worth their salt will have the Apple shortcuts in their user guide. They all, any of them that I've seen, have all those in their own information as well.
Excellent, thanks, Stuart. I have one other question, which you might be able to answer as well. Shane's just said, thank you so much, excellent as always. Thanks for that, Shane. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane.
So Vina is just asking, actually, has anyone used the device Feelif? Or have you used the device Feelif, Stuart?
I think Feelif is great. So I have Feelif here, and indeed, I think we in one of our little planning discussions about these sessions, we thought about doing something on Feelif. And I had the Feelif device since last year, the end of last year, but never had occasion to use it. I was actually going to do the reverse of what Feelif think you should do with it, right? For anyone listening, we have a 1-year-old or 1 and 13-month-old son who is fully sighted. And I was thinking it might be very interesting for me to work with him to point things out to him that I could touch on the screen, because it has all these obviously games and stuff like that, and that he could see them. And in other words, we do the complete opposite it was meant for. Now, we haven't done that yet because he's not quite old enough for that. But I think Feelif has an interesting place. I'm not sure it's a Braille learning. I'm not sure it's ever going to be the Braille learning system they think it will be without some serious hardware modifications. But I think in terms of space and getting kids to engage with something that's interactive, I think it's really good. But it's not. I don't think it's going to be the device you'll use to learn Braille letters.
Okay, great. Would it compare at all to the Tactile, or? Not
really. It's a different device, Angus. It doesn't have any moving parts. It's designed really for there's different modules in it. There's games, there's books, there's a whole load of little applications they have designed. The concept is very good, and it's an early-ish product, so I think it will mature. But I think they need to do a bit of a hardware redesign of it.
Okay, great. That's really good. Thanks, Stuart. Vina's just said thank you as well. Thanks, Vina.
Thank you, Vina.
That is it for questions for now, Stuart. I will let you continue.
Okay, well, that's all I had to say. We're almost at 3 o'clock. I really just wanted to talk about iOS and JAWS and I suppose Windows and Braille and stuff like that. There is an L Braille session because we're taking a break next week, Angus, aren't we? We're not here next week. We should say that to people.
That's right, yes.
So in 2 weeks' time, we're looking at the L Braille. And really, if you've come to this session, if you're not sick of me, and I wouldn't blame you if you were, by the way, but if you're not, come back, because I'll be I'll be doing a certain amount of assuming, I suppose, in terms of, because we'll try to build a little bit on anyone who's interested in those Braille input commands, for example, in Windows, come back, because we'll do all those on the Braille. And we'll talk a bit about the Braille as a device and the concept behind sort of why they're doing this. So if you can, if you're free, if we can, you know, bribe you and throw you a few pounds or something, join us in 2 weeks' time.
Brilliant. Thank you again, Stuart, and thank you everyone for coming along. Yeah, as Stuart said, we'll be back in 2 weeks' time at the normal time of 2 p.m. on Thursday, where we'll be exploring the Braille. Is that right, Stuart? The Braille?
Yeah, Braille in 2 weeks' time. So I believe that is the 18th of June. We'll be back with Braille, and I'm really looking forward to showing that, actually, because I've used a lot of note takers, Angus, over the years. It's probably the device that I sort of took and said, this is going to be my primary device that I'm going to use day to day in work and everywhere else. Whereas the other devices are things I use on and off, or I use because I'm, you know, supporting or training other people or helping people, but they're not devices that I'm using in my own daily usage. Whereas the Braille fit a real niche, and I'll talk a little bit about my kind of my moments of Braille and all that kind of stuff at the next session.
Amazing, thanks, Stuart. Okay, so yeah, we'll be putting the link up as always on the forum, everyone. So just keep an eye out for that from Julian. I think it goes out in the Friday email. Thank you everyone for coming along. Lots of lovely comments coming in, Stuart, which I'll update you on. And I think that's it for now.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks everyone. Have a great weekend.
Bye bye.